Hello and welcome to the Tough Girl Podcast, a 3-time award-winning show that aims to motivate and inspire you while increasing the amount of female role models in the media, especially in relation to adventure and physical challenges. I'm your host, Sarah Williams. If you're passionate about adventure, challenge and learning from women who have overcome obstacles and achieved remarkable things, then this is the podcast for you. Every Tuesday at 7 a.m, new episodes go live featuring incredible women who share their stories, insights and tips to help you achieve your dreams and goals. You can support the Tough Girl mission by signing up as a patron. Visit Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl Podcast. Keep listening until the very end as I share more information about what's going on with me with Tough Girl Challenges, give shout outs and recommend other Tough Girl Podcast episodes. More information can be found at toughgirlchallenges.com.
My name's Susannah. I'm from Bristol in the UK. I'm currently based in Bali, and I'm a few things. I'm a cyclist, I'm a rock climber, I'm a political activist, I'm an academic and a writer. I've been on quite a few adventures now. The biggest one being in 2017, I cycled from Bristol to the Middle East. So yeah, I'm sure you'll want to ask me a bit more about that.
Oh, definitely. Do you just want to say some of the other little adventures that you've been on?
Yeah, sure. So in 2022, a couple of years ago, I hiked a section of the Lebanon Mountain Trail in Lebanon, also in the Middle East. I have recently been riding a scooter around Indonesia. So I took a month this year in July to ride about 4,000 or 5,000 kilometers around the islands in Indonesia east of Bali, which was pretty amazing. When was that? Last Christmas, I spent a month hitchhiking around the South Island of New Zealand. And what else? I mean, I've done a lot of overnight cycle trips. I've cycled around the Kathmandu Valley in Nepal. That was also in 2016, I think. Yeah, 2016. So that's a bit about some of the adventures I've been on.
We are definitely going to be delving into those different adventures. I always love to go back to childhood just to see, what were your early years like? Were you outdoorsy? Were you sporty? Were you traveling a lot with your family?
I've always been really into cycling, and cycling is, that was, the big adventures that I started doing. And I loved cycling when I was a kid. I would just like to there was always bikes around the house. My older brothers had bikes and I had bikes, and I would just love to grab a bike and just disappear, just cycle around in the hills near where I grew up, just outside Bristol. And I just love to be outside. I just found a lot of kind of calm and solace in the outdoors, just being in nature, just walking through woods, camping with my friends, and yeah, just being outside.
So you mentioned that you're an academic. What did that journey look like?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I got very into politics when I was a teenager, going on lots of anti-war protests against the Iraq War at that time. And my mum is quite political. She's a big inspiration for me. So I went to uni to study politics and history at Manchester Uni, and then got a scholarship to do a master's and a PhD. So I just kind of carried on and did that straight after uni. So I didn't really get much time to travel in my 20s. So it sort of, I kind of built up that desire to go off and explore the world and travel while I was just kind of stuck in Manchester, just studying and just getting it really into the academia. So I finished my PhD in 2014 and went on to work in academia. I was working as a university lecturer, and, I was becoming quite dissatisfied with it in various different ways, and my mental health, I think, was taking quite a toll. So academia can be quite a stressful field for people to work in, and especially women, I think, and I was developing quite a lot of anxiety around my job, anxiety around giving lectures, about the workload. It was quite stressful, and I could feel my mental health not doing so well. So I decided to take a break in 2016. I moved back home and I just took more time for myself to kind of explore what I wanted to do in my life. I was working part-time and going on more cycle adventures. So this is when I decided to go to Nepal and cycle in the Kathmandu Valley. That was a month long trip in 2016. I also cycled across the south of France, along the coastline of the south of France, also solo and also camping on my own, wild camping. And I could feel that these adventures weren't quite enough for me. I really wanted to do something bigger. I wanted to see the world a bit more. And I read at that time Derbla Murphy's book, Full Tilt, which is an account of her cycling from Dunkirk to India in the early 60s. I think she did it in 1961 at the age of 31. And it was the same age that I was at that time, when I was having this kind of time out of work and a bit of a crisis, really, and thinking about what I wanted to do with my life. And I was so inspired by her trip. You know, she did it on her own. It was the early 60s. She's a woman. She just went off and had this amazing adventure, having some difficult times, but really just kind of going with the flow. And she was so passionate about these countries that she traveled in, like Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, countries that seem very difficult to go to now. And I thought, okay, I'm going to do something like this. So I started planning for my cycle trip to go. I didn't really know where I was going to go, to be honest. I just thought, I'm going to cycle along the Silk Route, roughly following Derbla Murphy's path that she took. So I ended up leaving in September 2017. I cycled from Bristol to Istanbul. And from there, I spent the winter in the West Bank in Palestine. And that really kind of changed everything.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's really important that anxiety, like the mental health, is talked about more, and actually, deciding to take a break and actually go home and explore what you wanted to do, and then actually going out on these adventures to Nepal and the south of France, and just having this solo time by yourself sounds like sort of incredibly powerful. And I always think it's amazing when women get exposed to what other women have done. So reading her book, riding from Dunkirk to India in the 60s, like just incredible. But it can just be that spark that ignites something. Well, maybe I can do that. And I think it's the next step after that, which I find really fascinating, because I know there's so many women listening who have these sort of dreams and ideas. Well, maybe I could cycle here, or maybe I could run here, or sail here, or do whatever. But you went out and you committed to planning that. And I suppose I'd love to know, like, what did that planning and the logistics look like? Did you have any fears and concerns? Talk us through that stage of the journey.
It took a while to plan the trip, maybe 6 months or 9 months roughly. And oh my God, I had loads of fears. I was scared of a lot of things. I was scared of being on my own. I was scared of men, essentially, just being quite vulnerable or quite exposed and camping in the wild. And it was a lot about this trip that was quite scary. But what I did was I kind of tried to break it down. So rather than it just being some huge big fear, I tried to kind of break it down rationally. And I read a lot, and I listened to a lot of podcasts, including your podcast, actually, of women who'd done similar trips. I went to talks given by female cyclists like Emily Chappell, Lee Craigie, and went on social media. I just got a lot of inspiration from women who'd done it before. And I just thought, okay, well, if they can do it, then there's no reason why I can't do it. And yeah, it is quite scary to go off on your own, but I think it's worthwhile to just kind of interrogate that fear a little bit and think, yeah, where is this coming from? Is this something rational, or is it just like a kind of message that we're told in society that women can't do things because it's too scary, or that there's too many dangers? And I think there are some risks, but we need to be able to distinguish between what's like a real risk and danger that we can kind of try and mitigate against, and what's a kind of a story that we're being told about women's vulnerability that means like women just are much less likely to go on big adventures, or to do things on their own, or to travel on their own, or whatever. Yeah, I tried to break it down like that. And I was still scared, and I think some of that anxiety doesn't really go away. It's just something you have to deal with on the road. But there weren't too many dangers. actually on the road on my journey.
When did you start feeling the freedom of travel? Like when, I don't know, did you have a moment when you were just like, A, I can't believe I'm doing this, but also B, like, oh, I don't know, like relief, I suppose, that you're out there cycling. What was that like?
Oh yeah, I think when I got onto the Rhine River, which runs from north to south of Germany, I think it runs from the Netherlands into the Alps, and no offense to these countries, but once I got out of England and I got past Belgium and the Netherlands, which are quite a bit flat, and I found it quite difficult to wild camp, and I was just feeling little bit uncomfortable. The weather was quite bad, and once I'd pushed past that into a bit more wild landscape in Germany. And I was on this big river, and I just kind of settled into my stride really. And I felt like, wow, this is actually amazing that I can do this. But it was a very rocky beginning, and I did doubt myself quite a lot. But yeah, once I'd hit the Rhine going south towards Switzerland, and then I was in, I had views of the Alps in Switzerland, and then I went and joined the Danube River, going from Basel to all the way to Vienna. And it was just really beautiful landscapes, and being amongst the wildlife was really amazing for me. And I found it very relaxing, and it's really a privilege to be able to do something like that and enjoy such amazing freedom and meeting all these amazing people on the way, and not just other cyclists but just ordinary people who opened their houses to me and let me sleep in a spare room or let me sleep in on their land. And yeah, it became very, very freeing once I'd got over the initial kind of doubts and difficulties.
With the doubts and the difficulties, especially sort of at the beginning and like just sort of pushing on through, was there anything specific that you were doing or that you were trying to do to sort of to manage that?
I was kind of winging it at the start. Didn't have anything booked. To be honest, at the start, I didn't wild camp so much just because I hadn't really found my feet yet. So I didn't really feel super confident with the wild camping. So I just stayed in campsites along the way in Belgium and in the Netherlands. And I think in the north of Germany, I stayed in campsites. And that was a way of managing the anxiety of looking for a place to wild camp. I mean, I know you've done a lot of adventures, so about, you get towards the end of the day and you think, oh, where am I going to sleep? Am I going to find somewhere safe? And so on. So to kind of really reduce the overall anxiety about the whole trip, I just thought I'm just not going to wild camp because it's too much.
Yeah.
It's too much. Yeah, like kind of worrying at the end of the day. But once I got to Germany, I'd kind of got over those initial fears, and I just look forward to wild camping because it's really amazing being so in nature, and you go to sleep with the sounds of nature all around you, and you wake up and you're just in this amazing forest in Switzerland. And that was probably one of the best things about the trip actually is wild camping in all these beautiful and also quite strange places, like in a cave or in people's outhouses or things like that. So yeah.
I think for me, definitely with wild camping, sometimes I've got to be in the right frame of mind. Like especially when it's like the start of the trip, I've almost like got to like psych myself up for it to be like mentally ready. And sometimes it does take a while, but then I find once you get in the rhythm and it's like getting your eye in when you're like, oh yeah, that's a good place. Yeah, I feel sheltered. I feel hidden. Yeah, that's perfect. That's flat. Beautiful. Boom. I'm there. And then, like you said, it is just this, amazing freedom, and it obviously it doesn't cost anything, so you're saving money, so therefore you can travel for longer. But then also I know I also have days where I'm just like I just can't do it tonight, like for whatever reason. And then it's like, right, I go on booking.com, have a look, what can I see, what's available. I do massively understand like that, the mental side of the game, but it is something I think the more you do like this, the better you get at it. I don't know, I think
Yeah.
it's such a free experience. You said that you reached sort of the West Bank in Palestine, and that's where you sort of stopped for a while. Would you like to share a little, and you sort of said it sort of changed things again for you. Would you like to share more about your time over there and what that was like?
I had initially planned to spend a winter in Palestine, just so I wouldn't be cycling through Turkey in the winter. It can get quite cold in Turkey. And so I was volunteering with an NGO in Nablus in Palestine. To be honest, what I saw changed me a lot. And I went over there with what I thought was quite a lot of knowledge about the situation. I have a PhD in international relations. I've read a lot about the Middle East and so on. But the reality of what I saw was so shocking. And so I kind of abandoned the rest of my cycle trip, to be honest. I did do a bit more cycling from Istanbul to Georgia in the spring of the following year, but I went back to Palestine and became very involved from then on. I had initially just been volunteering for this NGO, but I got more involved in political activism over there. I was with a group. When I went back, I was with a group called the International Solidarity Movement. They are a solidarity group, and they try to work their non-violent resistance, basically working with the Palestinians. It's Palestinian led. And they put internationals where it's deemed would help Palestinians kind of resist the violence that they're up against in terms of the Israeli occupation. So we were going on a lot of protests. There's non-violent protests in the West Bank, every Friday at least. And we would be there as kind of accompaniment. So as internationals who visibly look different, have foreign passports, as a kind of protective presence to try and reduce the levels of violence against Palestinians. It doesn't always work out that way. And very sadly, recently, one of our group was shot dead doing this work in the West Bank. So it did change me quite a lot. And not just witnessing the occupation, but witnessing the very horrific violence that's committed against Palestinians just in their day-to-day lives living under the occupation. And yeah, it's very shocking. It's very shocking. I don't know what else to say, really. We spent a lot of time not just on protests, but trying to support families who had faced home demolitions or arbitrary arrests or violence or settler violence. And the levels of injustice that the Palestinians in the West Bank endure and in Gaza, obviously, is beyond my understanding, to be honest. It's beyond my understanding. And it changed me. Yeah, it changed me a lot.
You're writing a book about it, or you've written a book about it. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. While I've been in Bali this year, I've written a book about the cycle trip, so about cycling to Palestine, and about my experiences there. And yeah, I'm kind of looking for an agent for it right now, and it's been very difficult writing that book at a time where we've as we've witnessed in the last year, there's been ongoing genocide against people in Gaza. It has been a very kind of emotional process trying to deal with and process what I witnessed back then during a time where this has escalated. The whole situation has escalated quite a lot. But I think it's very important for those who go to Palestine to speak out about what they witnessed. A lot of the visitors to Palestine, to the West Bank and Gaza, they are changed. So this is what I've heard when I've spoken to other people who've been. They are shocked and they are changed, and they do have a real motivation to speak out about what they saw. And it feels like a great responsibility, actually, to try and describe what it was like and what people go through there, and just the basic level of injustice, lack of mobility, lack of freedom of movement. And I just cycled from England, basically not quite to Palestine, because you can't. There's certain borders that are shut, like through Lebanon. But I traveled through about 16 countries, and I only went through border control like a couple of times, maybe 3 or 4 times. And it's a kind of a jarring thing to think about, being from Britain, having a British passport and enjoying this like amazing trip, and being able to enjoy this trip with such freedom, passing through borders within the EU that don't have any border checks. You don't have to show your passport, and then turning up in a place in the West Bank, which is a very small area with about 6 million people, I think, where there were just constant checks. It's hard to travel from one city to the other. You know, you need to show your ID. You will get checked by soldiers. You might have a soldier pointing a gun in your face. There might be violence and the roads are closed, or the checkpoints have changed for some reason. There's concrete blocks in the road. And it's just such an alien for me coming from Britain, for being a European, it's such an alien thing to have no freedom to travel around. It's been a hard thing for me to talk about and a hard thing to write about, but I'm motivated to do that.
When did you decide that it was time to move on and sort of either continue the adventures or continue traveling? What happened in that instance?
Yeah, good question. So I kind of had to finish my cycle trip to go back to work because I sort of ran out of money. So yeah, I returned to the UK and I returned to academia, kind of like on and off. You know, I had contracts and I would travel back to Palestine when I could. And yeah, and I decided recently to go traveling around Australia and New Zealand. And I guess I kind of finally realized like academia is not really for me. It's not something that I can do and sort of, you know, manage my mental health. So I've kind of just decided to move on to something different. And now I'm working in the private sector and trying to do my writing and activism and a few different things. But that's how I moved on from my job, I guess, from academia.
I mean, always just going back to that cycle ride. What were some of the, I suppose, the magical moments, the highlights, the countries that you'd want to go back and visit and explore and spend more time in? You know, obviously Palestine's made a huge mark on you as well. But before reaching Palestine, were there any sort of places that you were like, oh, this is actually a bit surprising, or I wasn't expecting this?
Yeah, sure. So I really liked the Balkans. I was, I think, surprised by people's friendliness and openness. I was taken in by by a Croatian farmer. I stopped there at the end of the day, and the sun was setting, and I hadn't found somewhere good to camp, and I just asked if I could camp on her land, and she said, "Yeah, you can sleep in the outhouse." And she invited me in, and her English wasn't very good. So she phoned her daughter, who was living in Canada at the time. And so she had her daughter on the phone, and then her daughter translated for me, "Oh, my mum would like to know if you want a cup of tea and a bowl of soup." And if you want milk and sugar in your tea. And I just thought this is so amazing that this woman's going out of her way to like ring her daughter in Canada to try and offer me a cup of tea. But that's just one example of how generous people were. And yeah, that was in Croatia. I had similar experiences in Albania. I stayed with a family in Albania who took me in. They just insisted on like washing my clothes and, you know, having dinner with me and the whole family. And then there was also a call to the guy's sister in Greece, and people really kind of going out their way to look after me. And that's something that's worth remembering when people are planning a trip like this and they're kind of quite scared, especially women, because when people see lone women traveling or hiking or camping or whatever, they are a bit more protective sometimes, and they want to make sure that you're okay, you're safe, and people, in my experience, do end up being more generous and hospitable. So yeah, I really loved Albania and the Balkans. Greece was really amazing as well. And Turkey. I mean, lots of these countries. I had a really good time in a lot of these countries.
Did you meet many other cyclists out there as well? Did you ever sort of like join up with other cyclists who were doing a similar journey to you?
I did sometimes. I met some really nice guys. I didn't meet any solo women on the trip, but yeah, I met a couple of really nice guys. A Spanish guy who was cycling around the world, and we cycled together in Macedonia, I think, for a bit. I met a French guy in, oh, where was that? Montenegro. And we cycled around Kotor Bay in Montenegro. And yeah, he was really lovely. Yeah, I met up with the Spanish guy again in Istanbul. And then he went on to cycle around the world. So he would be sending me pictures of him in New Zealand and Australia and Japan. And yeah, it was a really amazing thing that you have this instant connection with people doing something as crazy as you, I guess. You know, like you're just you have an instant like relatability. You know, you're just trying to find food and trying to get enough calories and sleeping in weird places. And yeah, it's really funny to like swap stories with people on the road.
You headed over to New Zealand to do sort of hitchhiking around the South Island. What was that experience like?
So that was last Christmas, and I'd gone to New Zealand to visit my family. I've got family in Nelson, and I mean, it was one of these adventures that just kind of happens on a whim. I didn't plan anything. It just thought, oh, okay, I may as well hitchhike around the whole of the South Island. And I flew into Queenstown and I hitched up the West Coast and then back down the East Coast and then flew out of Queenstown again. Yeah, it was. What was your experience of New Zealand?
I mean, to sum it up generally, North Island, there was a few amazing highlights like the Timber Trail and stuff. But otherwise, if you're on the Tiara Trail, it was just a lot of road walking, which, to be honest, was what I was expecting and not that fun. South Island was, I think that's what people see when it's advertised. The incredible mountains and the scenery. I think hitching, it's such like a New Zealand thing because it's such as like a small country and there's not really the infrastructure with I mean there is obviously like buses and taxis and stuff like that, but people do just pick you up and take you, and it's like you can have some like amazing conversations and interactions. And I think for me, like I didn't really like hitching like super long ways, like because so my tent got a pole broke and got destroyed, and I had to hitch to like the next town to get it fixed, and then sort of like hit. Well, the plan was to hitch there and hitch back, but it was like a 3 hour journey, and I was just thinking I can't do 3 hours in a car with a stranger. I'd rather just pay like 50, I don't know, $50 or whatever it was. To be honest, I also found it incredibly expensive. Like it was just, I felt like every time I was doing anything, I was just burning money. Like food costs, it was, like $100 for like 2 or 3 days worth of food. I mean, I do know that I was eating a lot. How are you funding your adventures? How are you paying for sort of like your new lifestyle or your new way of living? Like, are you able to fund that through your writing, through your books?
Not yet, to be honest. Yeah, so I stopped working last year and I've just been saving. I've just been spending my savings, to be honest. And I'm working again now, so I have a job working in the private sector. Yeah, I'm not writing to make money at the moment. I mean, if I do manage to sell the book and it makes money, then great. But yeah, I've always just worked on this, like kind of saving up. Work for a while. I'll save up however much money I need for this next adventure, and then I'll do it. So from my cycle trip to Palestine, I saved up 5 grand, which doesn't seem that much thinking about it now, but at the time it seemed like a lot of money. That was I don't know, that was in 2017, and I thought, well, I'll just spend this money on this trip for a year. And I did have some part-time work, so I did have some work online that helped. But yeah, I just thought, well, I'll just get a job when my money runs out, and that's what I did. So I don't know, it's always kind of worked out that way so far. I don't think you need that much money to do an adventure, especially the way that I do it, like wild camping or mostly wild camping, eating pretty basic food, cooking for myself on a camp stove. It doesn't really cost that much money to do stuff like that. So when I was hitchhiking around New Zealand, yeah, New Zealand's pretty expensive, but I was wild camping. I was just spending money on food, really. It was a pretty cheap trip. And yeah, I forgot that I actually hiked the Queen Charlotte Trail in Marlborough
Ah,
Sounds when I was in New Zealand. Yeah.
Queen Charlotte Track.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
What was that experience like for you?
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, it was over New Year's Eve last year. So I met some friends who happened to be camping on the track halfway through. So it was really beautiful, and it was, typical New Zealand weather. I think there was like a pretty bad gale and a rainstorm and then 30 degrees sunshine, and my walk was only 4 or 5 days. So yeah, that's what you get in New Zealand, I think. But yeah,
So
it was
wait, so when did
beautiful.
you when did you start that walk?
That was I guess like 26th, 7th of December last year.
So I was probably 10 days behind you. I was in Wellington for New Year's Eve, and then on the 1st of January, I got the ferry over to Picton, stayed the night in Picton, and then you have to get like the water ferry,
Yeah, water taxi. Yeah.
water taxi to Ships Cove. So I started walking the Queen Charlotte track on the 2nd of January. That's so weird that you were literally like,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
yeah, it does happen often though. When I was on the Southwest Coast Path, there was this guy walking along, and the only reason I started to stopped him, not stop, like we said that like a quick, hello, hello, because both in opposite directions. But I noticed his trainers; they were like Innovate, and I was like, oh, Innovate trainers, and he was like, yeah, they're the best, blah, blah, blah. And we started chatting, and then he was just like, yeah, I just finished the Tiara Road Trail. And I was like, me too.
Wow.
And it turned out, and I shared the photo on social media, and this other girl I was hiking with in New Zealand was like, oh, I can't remember this, a tall Alex, I think his name. And he's like, oh my God, you met Alex. Like, did you never meet him in New Zealand? And apparently he had been 2 weeks ahead of me, like the whole way. So it's just,
Oh, wow.
you've done other hiking though, haven't you? You've done, you mentioned at the start that you've through hiked a section of the Lebanon Mountain Trail. And I'd love to hear more about that.
So 2 years ago, 2 summers ago, I went to Lebanon for about a month and I hiked a section of this. They've got the Lebanon Mountain Trail, which runs, most people do it from north to south, but it's like 450 kilometers of trail. And I did a kind of short section, 50-kilometer section over 4 days, I think, from Akora to Bashare, kind of in the north of the country. And it runs along, Lebanon is, there's a coastline, the Mediterranean coastline, and then there's the mountains, which just kind of rise up from the coastline very quickly, and it's a really beautiful country. And then it drops down into the Bekaa Valley, and I was volunteering there on a organic farm run by women in the Bekaa Valley after I did my hike. The hiking it's been recently established. It's not, I don't think it's super well, like, what's the word, where you have
Oh, so well
which,
signposted, right?
yeah, exactly. This is not well signposted. It's but it's a very beautiful trail. Very interesting. It's like really kind of scenery that I hadn't really encountered before. It's quite dry, especially when I was doing it at the end of summer. But there's a real variation. It's such a tiny country, Lebanon, but it's got such a contrast between the beautiful coastline and amazing beaches, and then all of a sudden you're in the mountains, and it's like just got these like pine forests, cedar forests, which Lebanon's very famous for, and mountain lakes, and I was just kind of blown away by it, to be honest. Hitchhiking in Lebanon, I'd say, is a little bit, you have to be a little bit careful, and I was warned against hitchhiking all over the country, so I mainly just hitched up and down the coast, but it didn't run into any problems in Lebanon. I found it to be a very beautiful country, politically quite complicated. They had a really bad economic crisis a couple of years ago. So yeah, I was talking to people quite a lot about that. But I had a brilliant time hiking, and it's, I think, sometimes really worth going off the beaten track a little bit and going to countries which aren't, not on the top of people's tourist destination lists. But obviously Lebanon is not somewhere that people should be going right now, unfortunately. I mean, I had a great experience there.
And obviously when people listen to this podcast episode, which could be, years in advance, hopefully, things will have been changed and will be much better. But the UK government does have great sort of like foreign travel advice, where at least you can just go and see what is being said about the safety and security of the country, what is going on, what are the safety concerns. But also, to us, that's just generally, I think, just part of the research. And I think it's one of those things, it's like, okay, make a note of it, like put down the Lebanon Mountain Trail, because it sounds like an incredible hike, an incredible walk. And maybe it's not right to do it at this moment in time, but hopefully in the future, it's great to get back out there.
I hope so.
To go and experience it. And so you're in Bali at the moment. You've been driving a scooter. Before you got to like Indonesia, had you ridden scooters before, or is that something you learned while traveling around Indonesia?
Yeah, it's not something I'd done before, to be honest. The first time I drove a scooter was in East Timor, Timor-Leste, which I was there for about a month last year. I've since got my Indonesian license, and I drive a lot around Indonesia. And Indonesia's like, again, just another amazing country, and it's huge, and I want to explore it more. It's got such a wide variety of wildlife, jungle, different ecosystems. It's really amazing. And I spent time in the east, in Bali and Lombok, and the islands east of Lombok, which include the Komodo Islands, where I went diving. And yeah, I'm very lucky to be here, to be honest. And it's an amazing and different country for me to explore right now.
And so it sounds as though you're doing almost like slower travel around there. Like, and how organized and planned do you need to be? Like, I suppose, like, how structured are you? Or is it very much a case of just going, getting to a junction and just be like, right or left, flip a coin, let's go to the right and explore and see what happens?
I personally don't like to plan too much. I like to have a general, and sometimes you have to, like, it depends which country you're going to, I guess. But the way I do things is that I just like to have a general idea of what I'll expect, and what the climate's like or whatever, and what, where I can sleep, and things like this. And then I just like to go for it, and I just see how I feel on the road. If I want to, very lucky to have these options. But in Indonesia, because it is quite a cheap country for me, I do have options, and I can just think, oh, what would I like to do tonight? Would I like to camp on a beach, or do I feel like actually getting a hotel and sleeping on a bed? So yeah, that's kind of how I've run my trips. And that includes the most recent one where I drove the scooter around, and I just kind of go with what I feel like doing, which is the best way for me. I've tried planning trips in the past, and it just doesn't really work for me. I kind of have to just go with what I feel is right. Like, and if I feel safe in a place, and yeah, just what feels best on the road. And luckily, Indonesia's quite an easy country to do that. Like, there is a lot of accommodation options. It is quite cheap. And yeah, that's how I've done things.
And how's your mental health while you're out traveling? Is it just generally better for you, or are you doing anything to manage it?
Having had mental health troubles in the past, I do take it quite seriously, and I wouldn't want to get to the point again where I'm suffering from anxiety, pretty bad anxiety that I had related to my job in academia. I wouldn't want to get to that again. So I do take it seriously, and I do a lot of things to make sure it doesn't get to that stage again. So I do a lot of exercise. I spend a lot of time with friends. I have a community of people that I know here, which I've met through different activities. I meditate, and that's a really important part of my mental health routine at the moment. So I meditate first thing in the morning, and then as often as I can late at the end of the day as well. But it doesn't always work out like that. It's a serious thing, and I think these are the things that I really have to do in order to stay sane, to stay well balanced, and stay happy.
Do you ever get traveled out?
Yeah, I mean, I do, and I think I've changed the way I travel. And I guess I've always been quite into slow travel. I'm not one of these people that just like flies around the world. I try not to. Well, obviously, I have to fly because I've been to like New Zealand and Indonesia and places like that. But as much as possible, I like to do slow travel and spend and luckily my job, accommodates for that at the moment. But that's my favorite way to see a country. And now I'm living here temporarily. So I've been in Indonesia for 8 months now, and I am quite settled here in a way. But yeah, do I ever get yearning for home? I'm not really sure. Yeah, I really miss my friends. But for me, what's important is community, and being around people that you have things in common with. And, I'm lucky to have that in Indonesia. And, at some point I will want to go home again and be with my community in England. So yeah, those are my priorities really.
And just really practical, how does it work with the visa situation? Do you need a visa to live there for that long?
Yeah, you can have long-term tourist visas if you're working remotely. And yeah, it's pretty easy to get. There's lots of like what's called digital nomads working in Indonesia. So it's fairly easy to get long-term tourist visas.
And have you made any plans for 2025, or have you got sort of dream travel destinations that you'd like to visit or places you'd like to go, or have you not thought that far ahead yet?
There's been something that I really want to do, which is drive a motorbike round Papua New Guinea, which is quite close to me in Indonesia. So it's not outside the bounds of possibility. It's something that Papua New Guinea is, I don't know loads about the country. I haven't researched it, but it would require more planning because it's that kind of country. But it's something that I'd really love to do if I get the opportunity to take enough time off to save up enough and wherever it takes. But yeah, that's something I'd really love to do. And if I didn't have to work, I'd love to do an overland travel back to the UK, like just hitchhiking or going on buses. That would be really, really amazing, I think.
And Susannah, how can people connect with you? How can they find out more about your books, your cycle trips? Where are you most active on social media?
Yeah, I guess Instagram. My Instagram is used to be cool8. I'm sure you'll link to it in the podcast. And my website is susannahO'Sullivan.org. So yeah, those are the two kind of places where you can find out more about me.
And Susannah, I'd love for you to have you to share your final words of advice, final words of wisdom for other women who, know they need to make a change in their life. They want to do something different. They want to go traveling, to follow their passions, to do slow travel, to just do something which, for themselves, for their own mental health. What advice would you like to share? But please don't say just do it. Any other advice apart from that? And you can take that in any direction you'd like.
I think it's important to figure out where you're at and not try and do something just because someone else has done it, but figure out what it is, what is driving you, what's your real like fire and passion, and what would you need to do to follow that drive, and then think about what are the obstacles for you pursuing that. And is it because you're being told stories by the people around you, by society, by your kind of cultural programming, like, oh no, women can't do that, or oh no, you can't do that, that's too difficult, or oh, you won't be able to afford it, or all these things that we get messaging about either overtly or covertly through society, and just try and be brave and think, no, actually, yeah, I recognize that that's a story and it's not necessarily true, and I'm gonna just pursue my passion. It's quite hard to do that at times because I've had lots of people saying, oh, that's too hard, you can't do that, oh, you'll get lonely, oh, you can't make it to that far because XYZ. Like, it's hard to challenge that, but I think it's important to do that and be brave, and you only get one life. Just got to follow your passion.
Absolutely. Follow your passion. You do only get one life. Make the most of it. Susannah O'Sullivan, thank you so much for coming on Tough Girl Podcast and sharing more about your passions for travel, adventure, and for living life on your terms. It's been really, really inspiring to speak to you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Hey, tribe. How are you doing? I hope you're all keeping super well. Little mini update from me. I have been back at the gym, hitting it hard. Good way to start January. Working out with a personal trainer, focusing on strength and conditioning as well as mobility. I'm also doing a class called High Rocks Endurance. I don't think I'm ever going to do a High Rocks, but it's very good to try something new. And I definitely need to work on my speed and my endurance, which is what I'm doing on a regular basis. Absolutely loving it. I hope your January's gone off to a flying start and you are super happy and super motivated. And if you're in the UK, coping with the dark, miserable, cold weather. Hopefully it's not too horrendous. So during that conversation with Susannah, we talked about the Queen Charlotte track. So last January, I actually started on the South Island from a little town called Picton, which is the very top of the South Island, and walked on the Queen Charlotte track. So if you want to see what the Queen Charlotte track looks like, you can go and watch the vlogs on the Tough Girl Challenges YouTube channel. The vlogs from the South Island are coming out every Wednesday, Friday and Sunday at 7 a.m. UK time. It was honestly stunning and beautiful. The views, when you're somewhere and you just think, this cannot be a real view. Like, how is that water so blue? It was phenomenal. Had such a great time out there. Also, if you're thinking about what's the next adventure, what's the next challenge that I should go on, obviously all of the women who share their stories on the Tough Girl podcast will inspire you. But if you're particularly interested in cycling, then I've got a number of cycle recommendations of women that you can listen to. So Helen Langridge has been on the Tough Girl podcast before. She cycled Le Jog solo and unsupported in 2015. Then in 2017, cycled 30,000 kilometers around the world with her future husband, Mike. Rachel Yassine has been on the Tough Girl podcast. She's a 49-year-old mother and full-time adventurer, cycling the world and living a nomadic lifestyle on her terms. We've also spoken to the legendary around the world cyclist Jenny Graham, fastest woman to cycle around the world, 18,000 miles over 4 continents through 16 countries, completing the trip solo and sport in just 124 days. That record has now been broken by Lyle, Lael, Lyle Wilcox. So we have actually had Lyle on the Tough Girl podcast before. She came on the Tough Girl podcast and shared her story on June 14th, 2022, and she talks more about her ultra endurance, being an ultra endurance bike racer and racer who won the Trans Am bike race in 2016. But it's a great episode to listen to if you just want to learn more about how she started in bicycling in 2008 at the age of 20. You know, how her journey evolved and why she was why she was such a good cyclist, but you can see why the Around the World Challenge really fit her skill set. And it was amazing to follow her journey last year when she completed that. Hopefully I'll be speaking with her this year so we can have a catch-up episode to hear all about her Around the World Challenge. Everything that we have talked about today will be available in the show notes at toughgirlchallenges.com. Please do go and check it out. Toughgirlchallenges.com. I think I just said that. I'm going loopy. But on the website, there's more information about me, different challenges that I've done. There's also links to all of our previous episodes. There is a resources section where I go through. So there are cyclists, mothers and pregnancy, skiers and snowboarders, sailors, world travelers, explorers and expedition leaders, scientists and researchers, fighters, Olympians and pro athletes, cyclists, triathletes, ultra endurance challengers, swimmers, New Zealand, thru-hikers, ultra runners, runners up to marathon, climbers, mountaineers, seven summits, polar explorers, ocean rowers. And we have so many more amazing episodes coming out over this year. Every episode is going to be going live on a Tuesday at 7 a.m. UK time. If you have a guest who you think Sarah, they've got a great story, please send me an email, sarah@toughgirlchallenges.com. One caveat, which I feel I need to get out there. I try and get as many women on the podcast as I can, but one a week is only 52 episodes, which is not actually a huge amount. Although I think I did over 100 last year. I think I did 107 podcast episodes, but that also includes, my not monthly, but my 6 monthly updates. And there are a couple of extra bonus ones related to New Zealand, the planning and preparation for walking Tarot Trail and the reflections episode after that. But I will try and get those women on the episode. Also, please do let me know if you are training for some event or race or challenge and you're struggling to find the women. Please just send me a quick email saying, "Hey Sarah, this is what I'm doing." I can probably then recommend the right episodes for you to listen to. Or if I don't have those episodes, I can make a note of it and then make that a focus for this year, 2025. 2025 is a pretty epic year for the Tough Girl podcast because it is the 10-year anniversary of the podcast happening on the 4th of August. So we started in 2015. How is it 10 years? I don't know. Oh my goodness. I have no idea. But if you'd like to hear more about what I have been up to over the past 6 months, so from the Southwest Coast Pass, answering any of your specific questions and what my plans are for me and Tough Girl Challenges over the future this year, then I have released at the very beginning of this year on the 2nd of January a solo reflections episode. It's about an hour long and I talk through all of those things. So please do go and give that a listen. Thank you so much for all your support. If you're in, I'd love two cheeky requests. One, I'd love you to tell a friend about the Tough Girl podcast. That would just mean the world to me. Show them, share some of your favorite episodes with them. Show them how to listen to podcasts, especially if they're training for a marathon or a triathlon and they, not quite sure where to go or they're wanting to do a big adventure and challenge. Please share some of the episodes with them. It will make a world of difference, having this resource. There's over 750 episodes available for them to listen to. Second thing is, there's 3 things. If you haven't written a review for the podcast or it's been a while or you used to listen on Apple Podcasts and now you listen on Spotify or you now listen on YouTube, I would love for you to take just a couple of minutes to leave a review. That would really make a big difference in just helping get the word out there. Your views, your voice is so, so important. And if you can share the Tough Girl podcast on social media, that would be wonderful. wonderful. If you're in a financially strong position at the moment and you do have an extra £5, $5 available each month, I'd love for you to pay it forward. I'd love you to go to visit Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl Podcast, and sign up as a patron. There's a monthly option and there is an annual option as well. It really does make, I can't really emphasize this enough, it really does make a massive difference having a regular source of income coming in each month. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for all your love and support. All that's left for me to say is, wherever you are, whatever you are doing, give it your all, give it 110%, get after it, go for it, believe in yourself, because I believe in you. Take care, lots of love, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.